different than slightly different than the parking being overwhelmed. That is, in its daily, with the bridge structure and the cars, there's a lot going on in a residential neighborhood.
Is that an impact to the park or the neighborhood or both?
I think it's interesting, both.
Okay.
Although I'm more concerned about the neighborhood, but I think you have to go through that mess to get to the more natural parts of the park.
Hey, this is Kareem. I mean, I shared this earlier. I don't think parking should really be an impact. I mean, it's the parking capacity is the same regardless of the bridge location that we choose. We have the same parking spots. Parking is an issue now. We don't have any proof that the bridge would affect parking. So I don't know why it would be a consideration to choose one bridge over the other.
I don't see how it could not affect parking.
I think if anything, it could help parking because people could park on the other side to go to the park.
I don't see that happening. And if you're down here on weekends now, the parking is just overwhelming. I think it's not rational to me for you to argue that there's not going to be more parking as a result of a wonderful pedestrian amenity. Of course,
there is a pedestrian amenity. Yeah, people aren't driving cars.
People drive down there to take the walk across the river. The people, people drive to.
I think it's much more likely for somebody to use the bridge from Pantops if they wanted somebody out of the city of Charlottesville wanted to use the bridge or the Riverview Park to park on the other side at Pantops and walk across the bridge, then go drive to the wool factory to then go walk down to Riverview Park.
Everybody that lives in the city of Charlottesville will drive down Chesapeake Street to get to the bridge. And there's 40,000 people in Charlottesville.
I think maybe the way to maybe resolve this is to discuss that this is already a concern, that there's already a concern for parking, and that the impact of this project on parking is an unknown. And so it could have a negative impact, it could have a positive impact, but it's something that's of concern that should be part of the consideration. But Tim, you have your hand up. Do you want to go ahead and say something, Tim?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Sandy. I think I'll speak on behalf of the county just to say that from a recreational access perspective, and I know this is a transportation project, but working with the city and the county and the TJPDC on the urban Rivanna River corridor plan, I think both localities know that increasing access is important. It's an already existing need. And I think we're both localities thinking about that, vehicular and bicycle and pedestrian. I would just say that we haven't done the work or don't have the capacity in this committee to say, here's the traffic demand modeling numbers and the expected increase in vehicular trips. That's either not been done or isn't part of the feasibility study. But I think what this committee can do for sure is say, which of those two options could potentially contribute to solving some of the parking and vehicular congestion issues. I think the one option lower down on Market Street, there's no space in that conceptual location to accommodate parking. There is space at the upstream portion closer to Riverfront Park, Riverview Park, that could potentially accommodate some amount of parking. And I agree with Dick. I think everybody at the county really understands and sympathizes with some of the concerns about existing parking issues and potential future parking issues. But there's just an inability to really solve to that level of design at this level of a planning process. It's really more like an engineering and planning level. And those parking issues would really be something that can be solved, I think, at the future stages if this project is funded. So I just wanted to point that out with the caveat that I'm not going to be able to stay for this entire meeting and wanted to share that perspective while I did have the chance.
Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
Yes, Sandy. Well, for one thing, I think impact on the neighborhood. Yeah, of course, there are concerns about attracting additional vehicular traffic down East Market Street, but the same is true for Chesapeake Street, which has two very steep hills and is, and as any bicyclist will tell you, is not a very easy street to pedal up. But Sandy, I really don't understand why we're not thinking about this in terms, since parking is such an issue, why we don't include thinking about the wool factory parking as an option. That solves the parking. Brian Roy has indicated that he is open to talking about this. I know that he's on this call, so he can certainly speak for himself. But I have to disagree with Kareem. This is going to be an amenity that is going to attract a lot of people. They're going to do exactly what they do now, which is to drive here and park and access this lovely area. So Sandy, why isn't talking about that a part of this discussion about which option?
Well, I think we are talking about it, and you know, I want to be, Brian, you can weigh in if you want to, but I think one of the things that we just need to be keeping in mind is that the parking that's offered at the wool factory site is on a private development, and it's also not something that's dedicated, and it's something that's available if it's available, but it's not necessarily guaranteed to be available. So since it's not a public parking, I think you know, we just need to be really conscientious about what expectation we're placing on our private property owners.
Well, have you asked Brian Roy?
I'm here.
Yeah, Brian's here.
We had a conversation. Yeah. I'll jump in. Yeah, on the parking. I mean, I have, you know, 300 parking spots that for the most part, there's a high percentage that aren't being used on weekends. So, you know, I don't know what the capacity we're talking about here is, but I mean, yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to consider my site in the equation. You know, I can't dedicate parking spaces, you know, certainly at this point, not knowing, but having extra capacity, as anyone who's driven down there on a weekend knows, I'm certainly very open to having that be part of the discussion. And it's an area that's, you know, not getting a ton of use on weekends. So certainly it's easy to expect that could be a destination and a use depending on where the bridge, you know, ends up.
Hey, Brian, aren't there 10 spaces that are dedicated that Almar County purchased? Or
That's right. Yes, I do have 10 open spaces that I dedicated that are further towards Broadway, that are more of a direct access to the bridge that I put in over Morris Creek that connects to the Rivanna Trail. So at that point, you know, that's what we were considering. But I mean, I think especially we know that most of the traffic's going to be on weekends. So there's a number of spots that would be open, you know, not necessarily dedicated, but certainly open for use.
And Sandy, let's remind ourselves that you and others have from the very beginning said that your expectation was that there would be neutral, even negative effect on the parking because of this. I mean, I absolutely disagree with that statement, but that has been your own position. So it's not as though even from where you are, that we would be asking, you know, the developer, Mr. Roy, to accommodate a large number of cars. So I just feel that this needs to be a part of how we are discussing the bridge options.
I understand that, but also from the perspective of the folks that are facilitating this process, that there's another process that has to go through to get any sort of commitment for dedicated parking. And so we need to be respectful that we can't demand that as part of this, that's a negotiation that has to happen at a different level. So, I mean, I stand by that. I don't know that there's a strong expectation from most of the people on this committee that this bridge in and of itself is going to create a significant impact to some of these challenges that are already existing. I think the challenge is that a lot of these are incremental. It's something we're certainly going to share the information about and will be part of the consideration, but it's really outside the scope of this one individual project to resolve all of the challenges that are currently existing. And so that's what we need to be considering as we have these discussions. Not that these issues don't exist or that they shouldn't be addressed. It's just what's the appropriate venue and way to address some of these challenges. Go ahead, Tim.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with some of the comments that this probably doesn't need to be the issue that drives all of the remaining technical considerations, but I guess I would want to hear a little bit more about why parking spaces at the Wool Factory automatically leads to the conclusion that one site is better than the other when they're both in relative proximity to each other. For in other words, to take advantage of Brian's generous offer to use this surface parking lot, which is generally more available on the weekends, that's a great thing. Does that mean that the Chesapeake option is less favorable? Because I just want to test that assumption, knowing that there's only about 1,100 feet of street distance between the two bridge options. And if you're going down to the river with your bicycle and you're willing to ride presumably several miles for transportation or recreational purposes, I don't know that that quarter mile is relevant enough to kind of weigh that more so than bigger project management considerations like bridge cost, bridge durability and resilience, and grant application competitiveness, which seem to be more of a first order consideration.
All right.
I think we just need to sort of keep an accurate count. There are 10 dedicated parking spaces. Brian, I think you'd say forever. They're not subject to your whim. They're there that need to be recognized. And that's arguably as many as there are in the at least lawful ones at Chesapeake Street. If the pedestrian access to the Wool Factory Bridge is better, and I'm told it is, that Chesapeake Street's a nightmare for bicyclists, but that Broadway coming from downtown and Water and Carlton is a nice bike ride, then if the East Market Street Bridge is accessed by a better bike route, then that needs to be in the equation. We need to establish that. And I think that there's and then some of this stuff is touchy-feely stuff, but I don't agree that Chesapeake Street and East Market Street are functionally the same place because they're 4 blocks apart. I think they're very different places, and they're going to create a different atmosphere. And I think the Wool Factory also furthers this county object to create basically energy centers, and having that the sort of takeoff point for the pedestrian passageway and the bridge makes the Wool Factory a more attractive location, and it enhances economic development in the county of Albemarle. And we ought to be able to put that down. That ought to be a factor. I'll shut up now.
Just to help facilitate the process so we're all keeping track, it will help if you just raise your hand so we can make sure we're getting to everybody. But I want you to know, I'm going to communicate all of this to the policy board and to the elected officials. It's not that we're ignoring anything. It's just that we need to make sure that we're providing a full picture of what the opportunities and potential negative impacts are at either of these sites. So I think is there anything else that you all want to talk about that what you would consider a park and neighborhood impact outside of the parking or vehicular access that's not already on the slide? Okay. All right. So one of the other things we haven't talked a lot about is the visual impact. And I think Lisa raised this question before, or raised this statement, and that there are different philosophies about whether or not this bridge should have a strong visual impact or whether it should try to sort of blend into the landscape and be as non-intrusive as possible. And I think the challenge with this is that it might be a matter of perspective, but just to outline a couple of things is that there are basically 3 bridge designs that will be potentially feasible at either of the locations. Two of them are pictured here. There's the cabled stayed bridge, there's the arch truss bridge. So the cabled stayed bridge is the one on the top. There's the arch truss bridge, and then there's more of a standard truss bridge that would also be potentially feasible. So either of these would be options at either of the locations. And then there are some different options as far as any sort of exterior treatments that could be applied to these bridges to have different impacts. Yeah, go ahead, Bea.
First
you
of
mean-
all, could you take off your notes on the left-hand side so that everyone can see the?
Yep, there you go.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then
Yep.
also you said that there were 3 options, but you're only showing 2.
Yeah, I didn't show the standard truss option, but it's more of the rectangular looking bridge, and it has the crossbars as well. So it's the more standard kind of industrial design.
And the price difference between the 3?
Are you able to comment on that, Chuck?
What was the question?
Is there, do you have an estimated price differential between the different types of bridge designs?
The more expensive one is the cable stay bridge at the top. The one in the bottom is probably in the middle somewhere. And the truss bridge is the least expensive one. There is a little bit of, there's not that much difference between the arch truss, the arch. And this is an arch truss. The one that's actually shown in the feasibility study was a arch suspension bridge, which basically, instead of having this triangular truss, it has actually cables that come down from the arch that hold up the bridge. And that's a little bit less expensive than the truss, arch truss. And then the regular standard truss is the least expensive of the 2, but it depends on the length of the actual spans to how much the cost is. Because with the truss bridge, it can be less expensive, but the lengths of the trusses are really short. Whereas the arch truss, you can do a longer span over a larger area for about the same price. So that's where the difference is mainly. But I'm not a structural engineer, so I don't know necessarily all the details, but I do know the suspension bridge is probably the most expensive.
Okay, and
Which is
that's
the one
the
at the
top
top.
one. That's the one,
Yes.
okay. So Sandy, are you asking us today to choose one of the designs? Because if so, we don't, I would like to see all of the designs, everything that is, we would consider. Because we have about a $4 million difference between the 2, where the location of the bridge is. That's
Mhm.
one factor. And then depending on the cost of the bridge, unless you've factored in the most expensive bridge with the initial price, I don't know.
You know, may I add here?
Wait, can you please
Excuse me.
rate?
Go ahead.
wait,
Bea, I apologize.
Yeah, yeah. If we
Yeah,
use
let me
our-
pull up. Let me pull up. I do have an image of a. There you go. That's kind of the. Oh, sorry. And again, this isn't a rendering for this specific site. This is just a general rendering, but that's the design for like the arch truss bridge or the traditional truss bridge.
I mean,
So
are
these-
you asking us today to choose a design, select a design?
Well, if there's feedback from this committee, I can pass that along to the MPO policy board. Otherwise, I'll just take your comments back to the MPO policy board. You all don't necessarily have to choose the specific design today.
Well, for example, I'll just speak for myself, going
Mhm.
back to the 2 designs you showed us. The one at the top is breathtaking. The one below that is beautiful. The other one is probably the most cost effective. Bottom line is I want to see this project go through, and I'm really concerned whether or not with the price tag, it will go through. So I'm trying to do everything possible to make this go through. And
Yeah.
that's why I'm asking if you're asking us to make a decision
So, may I,
today, or will we, wait, Mr. Lawrence, could you raise your, use your
I'm
raise
sure,
hand?
I'd be glad to, yeah, I apologize.
But if we could go ahead and see the different options along with the price tag, I mean, will that give us a better opportunity to be able to choose? I mean, we all want this bridge to happen, and I think we have to make sure that we're competitive in this process to make it happen.
Yeah. Well, I think I don't know that we'll have that in time for this committee to be able to provide that level of feedback to this committee. But like I said, we can take the comments back and say, well, sounds like the bridge design should be informed by what's most cost effective, or, you know, or this is going to be an important visual impact to the community. And so we want something that's going to, you know, support that regardless of whether or not it costs more.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead. I saw, I know Fran, you had your hand up, and then Dick, you also had your hand.
I'll defer to Dick.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Dick, you're muted.
Of the three options, typically I choose the middle. Seems to me the standard arch truss, while it has the merit of being less expensive, and that could be critical when the policy board looks at this, to use another meaning of pedestrian, that sort of bridge is very pedestrian. It has no particular attraction or appeal. On the other hand, the really nice suspension bridge is almost too glitzy for us. I feel like it's an overreach for a bicycle pedestrian crossing. I think that's just gives the wrong signal. So the middle option, especially in the suspension mode, but even the one shown, seems to be both attractive, but not too attractive, and according to its expense, might not compromise our application, which of course we do not wish to do, because the main thing, as everyone has said, is to get this thing done. It's a great asset for everybody. So I would not regard the bridge style as a critical choice with respect to the application. The critical choice has to do with money and what we'll get through. But in terms of its appearance and the kind of the atmosphere, what it connotes, I think that suspension truss, is that what it's called? No, the middle one.
This is an arch truss.
The arch truss, yes, the arch truss, not the suspension. That appeals to me a lot. Enough said, thank you.
All right, Fran, and then Lisa, and then Anne.
So I'm back to kind of making sure we know everything that's out there. Brian Roy's bridge that goes from Willow Tree across Moore's Creek to the other bank is, I think, a very attractive bridge. It's probably, Brian, 150 feet, 125 feet. It's not nearly the 290 feet times 2 that we would need with the other bridge. It was built by Bridge Brothers. They are building a number of bridges at UVA, and they've given me an estimate for two 290-foot spans at about $3 million, which is very different than 15 million. And so I don't quite understand why those bridges, they're you can see it at Willow Tree, it's the same company. And they're very functional, and they're a fraction of the prices that we're getting. I understand that the pricing we're getting also includes not only the bridges, but the approach to the bridge and so forth. So it's not quite apples and apples, but there's some very inexpensive prefabricated pedestrian and bike bridges out there that we haven't heard a thing about.
Are any of the VDOT folks able to respond to that? I think there might be some additional requirements because it's a transportation project versus a more of a recreational trail project that might also add expense to the cost, but it would probably, I'm probably not the best person to respond to what exactly factors into the cost differential there, if anybody else is able to comment on that.
I mean,
The only comment I would
I'll
make
weigh
on that
into the,
bridge,
What, Brian?
sorry, I was just gonna say, the only comment I would make on that bridge, which you're right, it seemed like it should be a little bit cheaper. I worked with Timmons on the bridge design, and they kind of threw out a ballpark of $500 to $600 a linear foot, which I don't know if that corresponds, but that could kind of give you a baseline.
Chuck, were you gonna answer or respond to that question? Or was there somebody else that was gonna respond?
I was gonna say that we'll have to look at it. I mean, what was in the estimate in here, they were looking at several $1,000s a square foot for these two type of bridges. Now, so I don't know. The truss bridge, like I said, the truss bridge is the cheapest one, and it's about $1,500 a square foot. The other two were upwards in the neighborhood of about $6,000 a square foot, a linear foot, excuse me, linear foot, not square foot. So those why the part of why the prices have gone up. And I mean, we'll have to look at it because we look at bid tabs and comparable bids, and you've got to look at the geology. We've got a pier in the center of the river at the Woolen Mills crossing, which is going to be a substantial feat to actually get out there and install the pier. So it's not just, the bridge itself is not going to be extremely expensive because you can get a prefab unit and put them together and put it out there. But to actually do all the geology and build the foundations that you're going to put it on could be pretty costly depending on what you're running into. So I did look at the Liberty Bridge that Ann talked about, and I looked at that a couple weeks ago, actually. One of those piers is in the river or right on the edge in the floodplain, and it is a cable stay bridge that supports the structure, and it is only 325 or so feet long, or 380 feet long, and it is in a curve. So that's something that's feasible. But when you're talking about something that's 600 feet long, it's going to be, and you're talking about a major river as opposed to a minor tributary, the structure that you're going to put in the river has to be substantially larger. So those all have to be taken into consideration when you're designing the bridge to make sure it's going to be sound in the crossing a river. And there are a little bit different criteria when you're putting a bridge across a waterway versus putting a bridge across a road or something like a railroad tracks or something like that you've got to abide by. So, but like I said, the biggest we're trying to find out here is the locations are going to dictate the cost, and the type of structure that you want to put in is going to contribute to the cost. So we need to really know what those two numbers are, and then we can develop the cost estimate and concepts for in any structure, any location that you're going to want to propose. But that's what we're really looking for, so we can put the information together for the application.
All right. I saw Jessica had a question in the chat. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. If I can find the slide from another presentation, I'll pull that up. But Chuck, if you know the answer, you can go ahead and put that in chat. We'll go to Lisa and then Ann.
Thanks. I don't want to repeat myself, but I do just want to remind everybody that the Rivanna was the first designated scenic river in the state. And I think how this bridge looks is really important, not just that we want it to be aesthetically pleasing and enhancing the corridor, but we don't want it to block the view of the river. And I think if we put something that's too heavy, particularly in at the Chesapeake Bay, or Chesapeake, sorry, I have Chesapeake Bay on the brain all the time, at the Chesapeake Street crossing area, if we put something really visually heavy there, it is going to have a really big impact on people using Riverview Park. And I think we just need to be very thoughtful about that. I think that Arch Truss Bridge fits in very nicely if we go with the Wool Factory crossing, because that kind of blends into a bunch of other bridges that are already in that area, and probably the weight of it fits in better there. But if we're putting something in at Chesapeake, I really think we need to be very thoughtful about going with the lightest weight, very attractive, but the least impactful, blocking the view from Riverview. We don't want to do that.
Thank you. Go ahead, Anne.
Thank you. I would ask you to put up the picture briefly of the Greenville Bridge. I got this idea from the draft of the Rivanna River Corridor Plan. I had never heard of it before, frankly. But it, I think, resolves some of the questions that John had about, too foo-foo. But I think I am worried that we are going to not stop long enough to look at this third option. And then all of a sudden it'll be too late. So I want to make sure that we are asking the questions at the right time. There seem to be significant differences in the price of these other bridges. And so I understand we don't have the details available. I'm just asking that somebody write this down and not go beyond the March 3rd meeting or 10th meeting without this information. This is a light bridge. It has, if it's a single post in the middle at 380 feet, that gets us all the way across without all that stuff. So anyway, as I said, I'm not an engineer, but I do not want us to miss this opportunity to think about this.
Thank you.
All right. So there's a lot of information there. I don't know. We can talk more about at the end of this. Maybe if we want to talk more about whether or not there's a recommendation that we want to come from this committee about one of these over the other at the different locations, but we'll go ahead and talk about as far as location. These are images that are courtesy of PEC. I've never done this before. These are links, but these are panoramic photos that were taken at the approximate site on the river for where each of these bridge locations would be. So this top one is at the Riverview Park location, and then this bottom one is at the Wool Factory location. So you can see, obviously, just looking at this top one, that there's this is a much more open stretch of the river at the Riverview Park location, and this is around a bend in a river, so it's a little bit less visually impactful. So if we just do a quick little panoramic shot, you can see the open stretch of the river right there. And then going back, this is the bend going sort of where the Wool Factory is. And then this one shows approximately where the pier might be for the bridge at the Wool Factory site. So that might help give a little bit more of a visual indication. There's already, some other structures at the river there. So again, it would be less visually impactful at this location. And I think that really comes down to a matter of opinion, whether or not one of those is more of a pro or a con over another one. So any thoughts? Yeah, Lisa, is your hand up again? Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No
I
worries.
just wanted to say, initially in these conversations, I was thinking that the bridge at Riverview would really make it difficult to see that lovely view that's in that top picture. That's kind of the view that we consider like the iconic view of the river with the water tower and everything in the background. But the more, and thanks to PC for these drone images, because they're incredibly helpful. But the more I've thought about it and talked with my board about it, I actually think that having the bridge at Riverview, if it is an attractive and not too heavy of a bridge, would actually allow many more people to get to see this lovely view, iconic view of the river, rather than it being a problem necessarily there. I think that could actually be a real benefit, because otherwise you can't see that view unless you're in the water and halfway or 2/3 of the way across to the other side. So I think it would actually help bring, get people out there able to see this and thinking about how important and treasured this river should be for our community.
Thanks. Go ahead, Dee.
Yes, I tend to agree with the Riverview Park one, because there's nothing nicer than when you cross a river and you're looking down at both ends of the river and watching the beauty of the river. What bothers me about the Wool Factory location, although I do like the fact that it's near the Wool Factory, but you're crossing over this, it's actually an island, but it's all dirt, nothing attractive about it. So it's just getting you from point A to B. It's not something that you would frankly, stop in the middle of and look at and appreciate, and because it's not very attractive, frankly. It's, now I'll just say it, it's butt ugly, but you know, that's what it is.
Sure.
You know, maybe at different times of the year. No, I don't think it ever floods, so that's okay. But that would be my that would be my concern with that, although I initially did like the wool factory location, but crossing this is, you know, it's not something I would want to cross for the beauty of it.
Sure.
Yeah,
That's my 2 cents.
I certainly understand that. I've been back in that area a whole lot, and it's actually pretty attractive, and the island doesn't look like it's dirt, and it's a really interesting area in there. So I'm sorry this picture doesn't show that.
Okay. Well, maybe I need to go over there and look for myself.
I'd be glad to guide you.
Any
And
other?
after my comment, I may not make it back, right?
No.
It might depend on the time of year you're out there too. That can have an effect sometimes. Any other comments or thoughts on one of these over another, or things that should be considered regarding the visual impact?
Hey, Sandy, I will
Yeah.
point out that you could look at the there are some historic items at the south end down by the wool, because there is the raceway where the old locks used to be and the old dam site. And when we did our walkthrough initially, we did look at some of that stuff, and those could be features that you could look at from the southern bridge that you're not going to be able to see from the northern bridge. And you could actually put some informational material on the bridge that points out some of those historic features that used to be in that area that you wouldn't be able to see from any other location.
And if
Yeah,
I can,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, go ahead, Fran.
So you know, my history, I've sent most everybody the Rivanna River video or PowerPoint, and the bridge being further south at the wool factory makes you closer to the 3-notch trail and the old Jefferson Canal and the Jefferson Mill. So it's pushing you kind of further up the 3-notch trail in a way that I think is nice. You can't really get to those historic features from the Chesapeake Street. I mean, you can, but you can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm from the Lynchburg area, and they have this old railroad bridge that they converted into a trail, and it has some really nice sort of like a landing mid-bridge where people can stop and sort of enjoy the view. And I think it does have some of those informational medallions on it and things. So I've seen that done really well. All right, any other comments on that? All right. Well, what I was going to do is, since I think we've covered, I know we haven't really talked about economic development directly. I think we've talked about it. I think it's come up in the conversations. But before we ask for everybody to weigh in, any last items that we should discuss that we haven't discussed yet? I see Annie, and then I see Lisa. So go ahead, Annie. You're muted, Annie.
Thank you, Sandy. You made a comment earlier that this is a transportation project and not a recreation project. And I wasn't aware that the 6 criteria are evaluated differently, whether it's a transportation project or a recreation project. Are they?
It's a matter of what kind of funding you're eligible for and what the technical requirements are for the bridge. So if it's a recreation project, for us to apply for transportation funding, it has to meet the criteria to serve a transportation purpose, versus a recreational trail project, which would have different criteria.
I see, but we're still going through smart scale. You're talking about a different stream of funding if it were a recreation project.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, there'd be a different funding stream.
Right.
There'd be a different set of requirements. Yeah.
Okay, right. So, but it did remind me, because it is a transportation project. I think it was Chuck at our first meeting when I asked what sort of data you all were going to collect that would show that this would relieve traffic on Pantops. And I don't think that we've discussed that since.
Yeah, that's actually part of the evaluation process for smart scale. So we have basically defined the need. We don't have hard numbers, but we've defined a need through planning processes that have gone back for quite some years. I think the mid 2000s was the first reference I saw to where this need was identified. So I think as far as this being a need, or at least a strong desire, we're pretty solid on that. As far as actual quantitative data, there will be an analysis process that's part of the evaluation for smart scale. We don't provide that. The state does that analysis and gives us a score based on that. Does anybody from VDOT want to respond to that maybe slightly more thoroughly than I just did?
Yeah, that we look at it from a high perspective and to see using factors how much traffic might get shifted from vehicular to bike and pedestrian that may use this from the other facilities that are nearby. There's only two facilities that are close by this structure that would be considered, and that would be 64, which probably wouldn't be factored in, but mainly the Free Bridge on 250. So we would look at possibly there may be a shift of traffic from that facility, and for scoring congestion in smart scale, we would look at the shifting some of the traffic off, and you would see there would be a delta in the congestion delay score for based on the existing for 250 at the various location on that section of road, because we would be shifting via vehicles from people from driving cars to people walking and riding their bikes across the bridge. That makes sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, not really. I mean, I don't really think that that very many people are going to choose to do that who aren't already doing it. I mean, it is something that you can do already from Riverview Park. So anyway, I would be very interested to hear how high that scores in the smart scale.
Those scores will all be released, but not till after the evaluation process, but we can certainly share that. I see Lisa and Cream and Dick and then B. So go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to ask if with the bridge down at the wool factory with the pier on the island, if anyone has looked into potential impacts on wildlife on the island. That's something that one of my board members raised with me. That might be a nesting site for different water birds and things like that. So just curious if there was any information about that, or if that would be something that would be studied before that bridge could go through. And just also wanted to reiterate my concern about debris getting lodged on that pier in the bridge. I think that's going to be more of an issue than we would like for it to be. And it doesn't seem like there's any clear path in terms of who's going to be responsible or how they're going to be clearing that out. So just another factor.
Chuck, can you describe when the environmental reviews will take place for this project?
Yeah, once the project is identified and funded as part of the PE process, we'll have to go through and do a bunch of evaluations, and one of them will be both from a hydraulics analysis. We'll also look at cultural and natural resource that will be impacted, and we will evaluate any natural, like nesting grounds, spiny mussels. We'll look for, from an environmental standpoint, if the structure will be impacting any of those natural environments where those habitats might be disturbed. And those will be identified as part of that preliminary engineering review. But we won't do that until the projects would be funded. As to the debris removal, we'll have to work with the locality on that one. A lot of these, there might be a memorandum of understanding for, I know for the most of the road bridges and stuff that cross waterways, we actually maintain those and we will go out and remove the debris that might get lodged on them, especially if it starts impacting the waterway. In this case, I'm not exactly sure how that would be addressed. So I'd have to check to see if this would fall under the same guidelines or not from a maintenance standpoint.
All right, Kareem, then Dick, then B.
Thank you. I was gonna say, I guess on the previous slide on the aesthetics, I think everybody brought up really good points. I think what I'm interested in is as a placemaking aspect. I feel like obviously I think everybody knows my preference here, but the Riverview location, it definitely is a key. It's a pretty awesome way to make that into more of a defined space, having it at that location. And I like I guess, more abstract idea of building bridges between the city and the county at that location. I think that's pretty important. For things I wanted to touch on, if this was our last topic, I was interested in thoughts on accessibility and transit proximity. I mean, we're building a bridge that's ADA accessible, with ADA accessible trails all the way up to a certain destination, and how that integrates with a larger network of city and county pathways that are accessible, and how far could a person really use that bridge and go. Just as a point to talk about.
Yeah, I think we might have touched on that briefly in the previous meeting or two, but there's a stop. Let's see, let me go to the slide. There's an existing transit stop right now, kind of a little ways down. I think this was Riverview Street or Riverview Avenue. And then the closest one to the Market Street side is a little bit further away. And future additional transit access is probably less likely to be able to get in close proximity to this landing site, just because the road is so narrow. So that transit access will probably remain a little bit further away from the landing site, but still probably a pretty short walk regardless.
Is there an accessible grade down that street, or is there and also in addition to that, I guess, is there a potential to build a sidewalk there in the future?
Correct me if I'm wrong. I think for it to be at an accessible grade, I mean, I haven't measured it, but that is pretty steep. But you might be able to accommodate that by actually going through the public use easement at the wool factory and accessing it that way. That there is more opportunity to kind of reroute some of the transit access to be a little bit closer on the Chesapeake Street location there, just because the streets will accommodate it a little bit better. And then on the Pantop side, Albemarle County actually just worked to support a demonstration grant to get microtransit on the Pantop side. So even though the existing transit stop is a little bit further away, there could be some additional expansion of services that will provide closer access to that bridge landing. But does anybody from the localities want to say anything about that?
Thank you.
Did I answer your question, Kareem?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Dick, then B. Oh, Dick, you need to unmute.
I am one of the few, if not the only, resident of Pantops on this committee. And I have to say, it's very exciting for the Pantops community to have either one of these options. We've got the Presidio under construction where, I don't know, B is at 200 or 300 people in the Presidio. There's quite a lot of undeveloped land opposite the hospital that will be developed. I don't know how, but this area around State Farm is going to be, I think, a real point of attraction. And I'm sure it will be used to cross that bridge, to go to the wool factory and get a good coffee. to go up Broadway possibly, for people on the other side to come to Santerra. It's wonderfully convenient. You don't have to go around your elbow to get to your thumb. It's a good direct line. And I have a feeling this is going to prove important, even for people be in the, say, the Fontana area, whose main problem is getting safe across the 250, but that's being solved. And once across 250, it's such an easy run up to this landing point for the bridge. So whatever the issues are on the Charlottesville side, I kind of feel like we're in a big win-win on the Pantop side, and it's going to attract also people on the Pantop side to find easier access into Charlottesville, which will be good for Charlottesville. So I just wanted to say that from a neighborhood point of view, I know a lot of bikers in the Pantops area. I think they're quite excited about this. And there's also, as we've discussed elsewhere, long-term, the Old Mill Trail development will fit in very nicely with this bridge going further down on the county side of the river down to North Wilton. And the Jefferson Mill that was down there. So a lot of positive things that I see. And since some of it is in the future, Presidio's, a couple of years away, other developments are going to come. This is an urban concentration in Pantops, and good for that. And there will be people, and they will want to move. And I think it will actually help a little bit on transport. Chuck could comment on that, but I think if there's a potential to ease free bridge transport, it's a little bit further downstream when we have more housing, when we have Presidio, and there are people like myself who love to go to the wool factory, and I will not do it over the free bridge. I will do this bridge. And I know many others who will do this same way. So enough said, but thanks for hearing me out.
Thanks, Dick. Go ahead, Dee.
I agree with Dick, and I'm actually thinking if you want this bridge for people to be able to access work, to be able to go back from from Pantops area to Charlottesville back and forth for work, then probably the Chesapeake location is the best. If you want it for entertainment, probably the Wool Factory Bridge is the best, because I'm not sure, bikers, pedestrians, we're doing a lot of building in the Pantops area. Where you see the State Farm property just north of there will be a hotel. And then just southeast of that, below Santerra, they're building a number of apartments and homes there. So I don't know if all those people are going to be working in Charlottesville, but they'll probably be going to the wool factory. And I mean, for entertainment, and the people in the carriage apartments and everything can just easily walk. Either one will get you there. One will get you to more so entertainment. The other one will get you more so to go downtown into Charlottesville. So I like either one of them, frankly. Now I'm sold on both of them.
Let's just build two bridges. Let's put in two applications.
I'm in favor of that. If we can build two bridges, I'm in favor of that. Or build the Chesapeake one further down so that they're separated.
Sure.
And I think we're going to get all kinds. Actually, and the one that Ann brought up, Ann Malik, Supervisor Malik, excuse me, the one that she brought up, I would really like to see us look at that, because that looks like it's something that visually is not overwhelming. It looks like it's something, for pedestrians and bicyclists. And it's something that I think would be probably a lot more cost effective. So I would put in my 2 cents worth to look at that actual bridge. I mean, that way, if it's land on both sides, you don't have things running into it, like I think Annie mentioned. But I think that's worth looking into. I think there are designs out there that don't have to be overdone. Because if this does work out, frankly, in the future, we may be doing this further down in other areas, like at Dardentown, you know, in other areas of between Charlottesville and Albemarle County. But we need to make it doable and cost effective.
Sure, thank you. Any other comments?
I think there's some way you can push a button to get that little red hand up, but I haven't figured it out.
Go ahead, Fran.
You know, here I am. So I'm with Rivanna Trails is sort of my constituents, and we have a relationship with Cambric, Charlottesville, Albemarle, bicycle, the mountain bike people. Sandy, we should just try to get some kind of something from them as to, do they have a choice? I'm told that the Chesapeake Street route is steep and a little bit difficult for bicyclists. And so it'd be fun to have them weigh in if somebody knows who to reach out to there.
We actually,
Oh, go ahead.
there is somebody on this call. Dave Stackhouse is the treasurer of Cambic, and he is with us this afternoon.
Do you want to go ahead and make a comment to that, Dave?
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether I was on the committee and whether I could comment. So I've been adding to chat a little bit. To answer that question, the Mountain Bike Club doesn't have a position on this right now. It's really only just come onto my radar that you had to make this decision by March. So we do have a good email list that is very responsive. We hit about 800 mountain bikers in Central Virginia, with about 250 of them being our paid members. So I think it'd be responsible for me to reach out to them. I know Peter Krebs has put the survey, and I saw someone else as well. So it's already hit our email. So you may be getting responses through the survey. As far as mountain bikers are concerned, none of these has a steep hill. These hills don't compare to O Hill or the Shenandoah Mountains and the places where we mountain bike. But I would say that the approach on Broadway to the Woolen Mills location, which really has to be your approach for that to be a practical, to consider that parking. And because East Market is really very narrow, so you have no way for cars. So you've got to intuitively get people to think about getting to this bridge by going on Broadway. And right now, that's not the mentality of the bike community. We're going to roll right down East Market Street or come right down Chesapeake if that were the location. So I do think that this thought about what's the infrastructure impact for access to either one of these bridge locations is really critical. So we know the access via Chesapeake Street isn't great, and especially going back up those hills for a cyclist. But you've got a similar kind of challenge over with Broadway, in that even those parking spots are all the way around the other side of the Woolen Mills. And so it's not intuitive that you would park there and then you have to walk through the parking lot, all of the parking lots, to get to the proposed bridge that goes on the island there. So each one of these sites has a challenge there that I think heavily impacts the choice of the site. And I haven't seen in your comments that this idea of what is the full connection that goes back into the city, and it's pretty equal on the Pantop side. So it really is the city side of this. I did hear Tim Padalino say that this was being studied, but I think that's a critical component of making a sound decision here, because you're going to have users and you're building this for the users, and they're going to have to get to and from it by foot, by vehicle, by bicycle. and each has a different impact that I'm not seeing it in the equation here. So
Sure.
that's-
Yeah, and we did talk about this earlier on in these meetings, and I know you're coming into the conversation a little bit later, but
Yeah.
but it's just outside of the scope for us to be able to address all of those in one project. So really what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at how do we solve this one problem, which is that the river itself is a barrier, get across the river, and then continue to look at what the other supporting infrastructure needs to be moving forward as part of an incremental planning process.
Before I sort of sign off, I did also sit on the Bike Pedestrian Advisory Committee for 3 years.
Okay.
And the Broadway approach would need a bike lane. And the city is at least 5 years behind a master plan that was created in 2015 with about $500,000 that hasn't been spent to put in bike lanes that are behind the 8 ball, much needed for many neighborhoods, and they're waiting for streets to be repaved before they can be restriped for a bike lane. So this process of getting a bike lane on Broadway, which would be important in the thought of making it intuitive to get to the bridge from that access. And that's just for a bike. So ADA has been mentioned. I think all these things really do have to be considered. And I don't know how. I'll sign off there. That I've said my 2 cents.
Sure.
Thanks for the
you.
opportunity.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Sandy.
Yeah.
This is Shane, and I'm speaking as a cyclist here, not as a VDOT employee,
Okay.
as an Albemarle County resident here. I think you hit on it a few minutes ago. The key is to get across the river. As a cyclist, if I have to cycle a couple blocks either way to get to where I'm going once I cross the bridge, that is fine. I have options on either side, but the one option to get across the river is 250 or profit 20 miles up, many miles up the way. So basically there's free bridge or nothing. As a cyclist, if the bridge is built, I will find a way to the bridge going through the neighborhood that suits me best. But one thing I can't do is get across the river without a bridge. So, and I will leave it at that.
Very good.
Thanks, Shane. All right, BSC, you raised your hand. Go ahead.
Oops. Yes, Shane, I just wanted to ask you, which magisterial district do you live in?
I live in Forest Lakes.
That's me. Okay.
Yes, I was testing you to see if.
Oh yeah, I know it well. Thank you. Okay, never mind.
Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, just one other point I'd like to bring to everyone's consideration is user safety. My impression is that there's more users at Riverview Park throughout the course of the day as compared to at the Wool Factory, where even people sitting outside might not be able to see the trail or the bridge. So just as a woman who bikes, with kids, I do like to be biking through more populated areas rather than areas that are less well attended by people.
That's a good point. Great. Any other last comments or questions before I ask you to vote? Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
Sorry, Jessica, thank you for saying that, because it reminded me I had another question about lighting. We've never talked about whether there are going to be lights on these bridges, and I think it's something important to consider. On the positive side would be safety, on the negative side would be something out in the water that's distracting people. I'm just curious if that's part of the design, if that's something that has to be there, the plan to be there.
Are those maybe Chuck or one of the other VDOT folks, do you know if that's a requirement or if that's something that's something that could be added in?
I was basically going to leave it up to you all as part of the this process to identify whether we want to have lighting. You don't necessarily have to have down showing lighting. You could have lighting that's along the edge of the walkway that's less visible from below. That would light the path. So there is a way to accommodate that and provide lighting for the bridge that may not be detrimental to the natural environment around the outside, if that makes sense.
That is something that could potentially be discussed a little bit later in this process, so we could get through the pre-application potentially, and then maybe come back to talk about that a little bit later, Chuck.
Yeah, we can shoot. I mean, we're going to have some items in there that we're not necessarily going to know. So part of the application has risk and contingency in it, because there's a lot of items that we may not know at this going into it that we're going to have to take into account once we get into the design. And that's one of those items that we could discuss later.
Okay. And then go ahead, B.
Yeah, I would say, remember we have the dark skies, the county has a dark skies policy. So it'd have to be the type of lighting that is not real bright. It'd have to be inset, maybe dusk to dawn, but a low level of lighting to allow people to cross safely. But that would be a concern also. So thank you.
Sure. All right. Good points. All right, so if you are officially on the committee, if your name is on that table at the beginning, we're going to ask everybody else to hold off on voting for right now. We're just going to take a poll and see what your preference is. So you can either use the hand raise button on your through the Zoom feature, or if your name is Fran, you can raise your hand and we'll look for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. No problem. And Bella, if you can just help me try to count the number of hands raised for each one. All right. So if after all of our discussion up to this point, you prefer the Chesapeake Street alignment, go ahead and raise your hands. Their way. 1, 2, 3. Looks like, do you get 3, Bella? 4?
I'm actually saying 5.
Oh, 5, okay.
Tim, I think, left it in the chat earlier because he had to leave.
Okay. All right. So you got those, Bella?
Got them, yep.
Okay, go ahead, put your hands down. All right. And if you prefer the East Market Street alignment, go ahead and raise your hand. Got Fran. 1, 2, 3. You have all those, Bella?
I see 2 in the chat, and then you said Fran raised his hand?
Yep, Fran's hand is raised too.
Got it.
3. Okay. All right. And then Chris says he prefers East Market Street if I'm a voting member, and he is. So that's 4.
Got it.
Okay. So pretty even split. Okay. All right, thanks guys. So that's our straw poll. So we'll pass that information along, and Anne's here and she's on the policy board, so she can also help keep me honest and make sure that I'm relaying the information accurately when we share a summary with the policy board of our discussion. All right, so just so you all can have all of this information on your radar, we will be having a public meeting on February 22nd at 6 p.m. So hopefully all of you should have been copied on that email with that notification. And I'm sure some of you have been sharing the information as well. So thank you for doing that and helping to distribute the information. You all are welcome to attend. It will be a lot of the same information we've been discussing in these meetings, but sometimes it's always helpful to hear other people's feedback and questions. The survey will continue to be open until March 4th. We're pretty close to almost 500 responses. So I'm gonna see my goal now is to get to, I think my original goal was to get to 500. Now we'll see if we can get to 1,000. But I think probably most of the people who responded are going to respond this first part. We'll be debriefing the MPO policy board at a special meeting on March 10th. And then at their meeting on March 23rd is when the policy board is going to make their final determination on the location and the bridge design. So we'll have all that information to share with them on March 10th, and then they'll have just about 2 weeks to sit on that and process it and ask any additional questions. Yeah, go ahead, Annie.
Hey, do the city and the county meet and vote on this?
That we will be asking them for resolutions of support at some point, but I don't know if either of the supervisors that are on the call today want to talk about their process to discuss that with their localities prior to the policy board making a determination.
Probably not going to happen.
Okay. Okay.
Just being on, not that we don't want to, but there's just a lot going on. We've got, you know, budget matters, the city's getting its act together. So yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
If it did happen, that would be fine.
Good. Thank you, B. As we mentioned, the pre-application deadline is March 31st. So we basically need the location and the design for the pre-application to go through, and then we'll be working on getting additional information developed for the final application that would be submitted on August 31st. So all of the information about all of these meetings will be on our website. And if you have any questions about this, you're welcome to ask me at any point. And then I know we've had kind of a more informal discussion with some others jumping in here, but if you are not on the committee and had questions or comments that didn't get addressed, this is your chance. So go ahead and raise your hand. Am I missing? Oh, there you go. Go ahead, Peter.
Thanks, Sandy. I'm not surprised to see sort of a split decision on this, but both opportunities are really great, and I feel very confident that the result is going to be a good one, no matter which option we choose. As Sandy alluded, or others have, I've done a round of communications about it. I talked to Kendall Stewart at the corner about it just before this meeting. So trying to drive more participation. Hopefully folks will show up to the public meeting next week. As I noted in the chat, I will reach out to Centera Martha Jefferson and ask them to distribute the survey and let folks know about the meeting among their employees. I think obviously we're not going to have a scientific sample from the community, but I think hearing from folks like that would be good. Sandy mentioned that there's been a postcard mailing, and I hope to be able to follow up with a flyering of the same geographic area that Sandy's mailing to closer to the end of the survey, maybe around like March 1st or 2nd, and say like, this is your last chance. And in addition, I hope to have my flyering extend a little bit outside of the Woolen Mills area into the bottom of Carlton Avenue. There's a bunch of new housing there, and there's a trailer park that's there. So try to reach out to them. If there are members of the committee or Sandy or anybody that would like to have additional outreach that we can help with, let me know. I don't know if you all have seen or heard the podcast Serial, where she's always going, on the one hand this, on the other hand this. That's kind of how I feel about this project. Like, there's so many exciting things and challenges about either one. So my mind does sort of go back and forth between the two. One thing I think also to remember is that one of the reasons we're doing this conversation is that if we surface something that we don't love about either option, hopefully we'll be able to actually mitigate that. And that goes across almost all the decision criteria, right? So So parking is something that can not be solved, but can be helped. Even, the cost, perhaps, the cost can be played with local participation or whatever way we do it. If we find out that we're primarily concerned about having the bridge, clear the river by the most amount, it could be possible to adjust the height of the bridge. We're working with some pretty preliminary engineering.
Right.
But the process is great. I'm super excited, and it makes me want to live in Pantops.
Thanks, Peter. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up, and we've been talking about the wool factory as a destination, but the other tenant in this building is Willow Tree, and they're very much in favor of obviously a bridge and access on the East Market side. They have a number of employees up on Pantops. They view it as a beneficial route down to their
Great.
place of employment. And then also, I know we're at the very early stages from the county's Broadway blueprint, that Broadway could look very different in the future. It definitely has much better potential for access, whether that's pedestrian, bicyclists, public transportation, et cetera. So, I know Broadway hasn't been thought of as a main thoroughfare to this point, but the hope with obviously this kind of development that Broadway becomes more of a main access point and takes that pressure off of East Market and Chesapeake, which certainly I'm in favor of. So hopefully, along with the county, that can be rolled into the broader discussions to make Broadway the one of the main access points for individuals that will be coming down and enjoying the river, and then obviously enjoying the bridge in the future. So.
Thanks, Brian. Any other comments or questions from the public? Do you have another question, Peter, or is that a residual hand up? Okay. Okay. It sounds
Sorry
like,
about that, Sandy. I always forget to do that.
no worries. It sounds like, let me just ask, you can do a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or how about thumbs up if you like it and nothing if you don't. But do you all want to meet again, maybe a little bit later, not in March, but maybe in April or so to talk about some of these other items? Well, maybe to debrief, but also to talk about some of these other items that are later stage decisions. Or are you satisfied with where we are for right now and are happy to follow the process separately? So if you want to meet, maybe a thumbs up or a hand raise. If you're good to just move forward from this point, and I can send you an update, you can do that. Couple hand raised, couple thumbs up. Okay, we'll plan to do that then. It will probably be April. We have a busy March ahead of us, but we'll plan to do that. All right, with that, I think we are good. So if there are no further questions, I hope everybody has a good night. Thanks for sticking it out with us. And yeah.
Thank you, Sandy.
You're welcome. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much, Sandy. Great
Thanks.
job.
No problem. Bye-bye.